In the Defensores Fidei Foundation seminar, usually I give one of two topics. So I discuss one of two topics. The first is sacred scripture. The second is church history. And church history really is my great interest. And precisely because I'm so interested in church history, it is very difficult for me to give this talk. Why? Because I have only 2 hours. And there are so many topics to discuss. And history, first and foremost, is one of those topics where you simply cannot oversimplify anything. Okay? In church history, sometimes in apologetics, makita kami mga simplifications on church history. Unavoidable yun, granted. But that does not mean that you stop there. Especially if you're interested in the nuances of church history, you end up having to read more and more and more and learn more and more. And in my time reading church history, I've come to 2 great realizations. The first is that the history of the church is really extremely nuanced. Okay. The word to remember here is nuance. Madalas, hindi black and white, kundi gray ang ating makikita. May mga bagay na hindi mo completely, maraming bagay sa church history na talagang ang tindi ng pagkakahalo ng tama at ng mali at mahirap i-whitewash, mahirap rin i-condemn palagi. Mamaya, for instance, i-discuss ko yung Inquisition. No? Sometimes the tendency among some Catholics is to condemn the Inquisition completely. Among some Catholics, the tendency is to whitewash the Inquisition and to present it like there's nothing wrong with it. Hindi pwede yung ganong klaseng oversimplification. Kailangan ng nuance. Ganon din sa Crusades, ganon din sa mga praile, ganon din sa lahat ng issues ng church history. The second thing to keep in mind here is that the church is a divine institution completely made up of, here on earth at least, completely made up of fallible human beings. What makes the church holy is not the sins and foibles of its human members, but the grace of Christ flowing through these same people because they are members of the church. So, kumbaga si God, despite yung weaknesses ng mga tao sa simbahan, He still manages to work through them and He manages to give them to do great works through them. By the way, mamaya I will be going through my talk, but please forgive me if I go into long digressions into other periods of church history. This lecture is not intended to be a comprehensive overview of church history. That is simply not possible in 2 hours or even in 2 days. If there is one topic na hindi mo pwede madaliin, it's church history. This is just an overview of some topics and a way of presenting to you yung mga iba't ibang ways of looking at church history, iba't ibang considerations that can help you in your own journey in learning more about apologetics. A few days ago, I was in Siquijor. And, syempre, nandun na rin ako. So, nag-tour ako ng mga ilan sa mga simbahan doon. Yung Siquijor Church, Lazi Church. Lazi Church is this huge, fortress-like church. And yung Divine Providence, Mother of Divine Providence Church. So Siquijor has these big churches, very big churches with very thick walls. And what was the reason for that? It's because those churches were built not just as churches. They were built as fortresses. Bakit? Kasi, nung panahon na yon, halos wala namang mga sundalo ang Espanya in the small islands of the Philippines. When the Moros would attack the Visayan Islands, all that the natives could do was to flee to the church and lock themselves in and perhaps fire back with a few weapons hanggang ma-discourage yung mga Moro, magsa-sail away na lang sila. Small things like that, knowing those small things, will also enrich your understanding of our own history and our own heritage. Minsan maintindihan ninyo, bakit ang mga bagay-bagay ganyan? Bakit sa mga simbahan, may ilang simbahan sa probinsya, makapal ang pader? Bakit sa mga ilang probinsya, lalo sa Ilocos, yung mga church towers, ang layo-layo mula doon sa simbahan, and that's the reason for that is because they were not just church towers, they were watch towers. No? Ginagamit na watch towers para sa kung malayo pala, makikita nila kung nandun na yung mga Moro. Because believe it or not, the Moros would raid Christian settlements all the way to the Ilocos. Okay. So knowing these small things will also help you understand yung mga unknown aspects ng ating history, ng ating Philippine history. All right, so can we go na to my first slide? So ito yung mga madalas natin matanong tungkol sa international na aspect ng church history. May tatawag na Great Apostasy. Mahilig dito ang mga Mormon, Iglesia de Cristo, yung mga ilang born again. Ilan lang naman, hindi lahat. No? Meron yung mga nagsasabi na yung Roman Empire daw ay na-corrupt ang simbahan. Palagi na pag-uusapan, of course, yung mga Crusades. Some of you may remember, some time ago, na si Obama, alam niyo naman si President Barack Obama ng US, nagbigay siya ng isang statement na parang nagbigay siya ng equivalence between Christianity and Islam. Kasi sabi niya, ang Islam nga violent, oo. Pero ang Christianity may crusades. And a lot of scholars, even Protestant scholars, nagulat ako, no? Even a lot of Protestants online were saying, wait a minute, the Crusades were waged hundreds of years ago. Al-Qaeda and ISIS are doing their thing right now. There's simply no equivalence between the two. And the Crusades were largely done in self-defense by the Christian world. So, mabuti na lang, no? May mga nabuksan ng mata about the truth behind the Crusades. So, of course, yung Inquisition, yung Church and Science, na simbahan daw, pinersecute si Galileo, ang simbahan daw, naniniwala sa flat earth, so on and so forth. Napakadaming issues na madalas itapon sa simbahan. Next slide, please. Sa local church history naman, ito yung mga madalas na nagiging issue. Mga praile. Una sa lahat, di ba? Praile. Pangalawa, si Rizal at ang Catholic Church. Yung relationship between the church and Filipino nationalism. At finally, mapalagi nagsasabi na kaya tayo mahirap kasi Katoliko tayo. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay. First and foremost, in this lecture, I'm not just going to talk about historical events. I'm also going to remind you about some theological and biblical principles. In church history, really, the most important aspect behind the attacks on the church that are based on history is to show that the Catholic Church is not possibly the true church. It could not possibly be the true church because it has done so many bad things in its history. Yun yung main point, yung main axis of attack against the Catholic Church. That's the reason why so many critics of the church keep praising her history. Kasi ang principle dyan, if you show that the Catholic Church committed so many mistakes, so many errors, then perhaps the Catholic Church is not really the true church. Among some groups, lalong-lalo na yung mga iglesia, mga Sabadista, Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormon, mahilig sila sa tinatawag na Great Apostasy. According to the Great Apostasy theory, Jesus Christ founded the true church. He founded the true church, but this true church became corrupted. Totally corrupted. So much so that the church died out or disappeared. It died out or disappeared until whoever their founder was came around. So until Joseph Smith came down, for the Mormons, the church had totally disappeared. According to the Iglesia, the church founded by Jesus Christ had disappeared until Felix Manalo starved himself for 3 days and came out of his room with a new church. Yung and marami pang ibang mga examples nito. Lalo-lalo dito sa Pilipinas, tayo sa Pilipinas, mahilig tayo sa mga nagsasabi na sila daw ang tunay na apostle o tunay na preacher o only sensible preacher of our time. Madaming ganyan. Na para bang somehow, by some magic, sila ang naging pangalawang tagapagtatag ng iglesyang itinayo ni Kristo. No? Yun ang sasabi na palagi. Now, bakit nasasabi to? First and foremost, this is because of various passages in the Bible that do in fact speak or warn against apostasy. These are some of the passages. Okay? And according to those who use these verses, lalong-lalo na yung mga Mormons, who I think they have the most sophisticated sense na mahaba, yung talaga detailed na explanation ng sasabi ng great apostasy. These verses daw were the apostles' way of saying that the church would somehow die out after them, and hindi siya mabubuhay until sometime later. Pero ang problema ngayon sa mga nasasabi ng great apostasy, una sa lahat, they could not even agree on when the great apostasy actually took place. Nung bata ako, meron akong magazine mula dun sa Church of God. Yung Church of God ni Armstrong. At ang sabi doon, nangyari daw yung first apostasy, yung great apostasy, pagkatapos mamatay ni Apostle John. Minsan nakapanood ako ng isang program ng Iglesia ni Cristo, or rather Iglesia ni Manalo. Sabi nila, yung great apostasy ay nangyari dahil kay Ignatius of Antioch. Na maipapaisip ka, paano nangyari yun? Ano? May mga nagsasabi naman na nagkaroon daw ng great apostasy dahil kay Constantine. No, we will deal with that later. May mga nagsasabi na it was because of Justinian or it was because of Gregory the Great. May mga iba naman, ito yung the more classical Protestant view, is hindi naman daw total yung great apostasy. The church sorta survived from the time of the Roman Empire until the 16th century when Luther, Calvin, Zwingli, or Henry VIII, or whoever, came along and purified the church of all corruption. Ganun palagi ang mga sasabi nila. So, si Martin Luther daw, according to the classical Lutheran view, when he came, he restored the genuine teaching of the church that had been corrupted by the evil papists. Ganun din si Calvin, ganun si Zwingli. So, ang problema ngayon una sa lahat is, when did the great apostasy take place? You see, with the various Protestant churches and sects, it's quite clear when they arose. Martin Luther came out with his revolt in 1517. Diba? 1517. Si Calvin, he founded the Calvinist church in Geneva in the 1530s and 1540s. Actually, hindi si Calvin lang yung founder. There were a group of reformers talaga. Sila Calvin, sila John Knox sa Scotland. They founded what is now the Presbyterian or Reformed tradition of Protestantism. Sa Church of England, klaro, it was Henry VIII who broke away in 1534. Tapos, after he died, si Edward VI ginawang very, very Protestant yung church ni Henry VIII. Kasi si Henry VIII, initially, he just broke away from Rome. He broke away from Rome. But the Church of England actually remained more or less Catholic in its liturgical practices and most of its doctrines. Isipin niyo yung mga aglipay para silang ganon. Then, nung namatay si King Henry VIII in 1547, pinalitan siya ni Edward VI. Under Edward VI, naging super Protestant naman talaga yung Church of England. Namatay siya, 1553. You had Queen Mary becoming the monarch of England. Si Queen Mary, Katoliko. Queen Mary tried to restore the Catholic Church in England, but she died in 1558. So, she died in 1558, pinalitan ni Elizabeth. At si Elizabeth came up with what is now the Anglican Church, which is essentially a hybrid of Catholic practices and structure and Protestant doctrine. To a great extent, ang Anglicans, ganun pa rin hanggang ngayon. May mga Anglicans na halos katolikong-katoliko, minsan mukhang mas katoliko pa kaysa sa katoliko. May mga Anglicans na talaga super low church o parang Presbyterian or Reformed ang dating. But the problem with all of this is, first and foremost, sila, alam nila when they were founded. Iglesia, 1914. Diba? Mormons, noong 19th century. Pero pag talaga tinanong mo sila, kailan yung actual na point ng Great Apostasy, hindi nila ma-pinpoint. Hindi nila ma-pinpoint. Yun ang problema. Next slide, please. The fact is, it is true that there are warnings in sacred scripture against the great apostasy, against an apostasy. No? But there are no verses in the Bible that say that all Christians or all the followers of Jesus Christ would fall into apostasy. The fact that there are warnings against apostasy itself is an argument against the great apostasy. Why? Kasi if the apostles were warning against an apostasy, ibig sabihin pwede siyang iwasan. It was not set in stone na mangyayari talaga siya. There were warnings. They were warning the faithful against going into apostasy because they knew that their writings would survive through the centuries and people, Christians, would always read those. And reading those, alam nila palagi, may palagi warning, do not fall away from the church. So in fact, these warnings against apostasy are also an argument against the great apostasy. Also, in various Bible verses, makita natin dito sa Matthew 16:18, Matthew 28:20, may mga implications na the church will always survive for the simple reason that, una sa lahat, the church was, diba? For example, it's Matthew 16:18, pinangako ni Kristo that he will build the church upon the rock. Of course, the rock of Peter. Okay? He will build the church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. Sinabi ni Kristo sa kanyang mga alagad na he will always be with them to the end of the age, which means he was not just talking to the apostles. He was by implication, talking to the successors of the apostles, to those who stand in the place of the apostles. Kasi to the end of the age, he will always be with the church. In Luke 1:33, may prophecy na he will reign over the house of Jacob forever, and of his kingdom there will be no end. And in 1 Corinthians, ito madalas natin binabanggit sa misa to, di ba? That as often as we eat this bread and drink this cup, we proclaim the death of the Lord until He comes, which implies yung Holy Mass, yung Eucharist, will always survive until the end of time, until He comes. These verses do not make any sense if at any point in history mawawala yung simbahan. They do not make any sense unless at one point mawawala yung simbahan. And come to think of it, it is an extreme act of hubris to say na yung si Kristo nagtatag ng simbahan, nasira, nawala, natalikod. Tapos, ikaw, magfa-found ka ng sarili mong simbahan. Pero ito yung tunay na simbahan ni Kristo at ito hindi na ito mawawala ulit. Ang kapal naman ng mukha nila. Diba? Mas magaling pa sila kay Kristo. It's this simple. If Christ founded the church and it did not survive, or it passed away from existence, even for just one day, then Christ is a liar. It's that simple. Either the church always will survive to the very end, or it's not worth believing in the gospel. It's that simple. Now, in Catholicism, we do believe that one of the signs of the end of days is a general apostasy in the end. But general apostasy simply means the great mass of believers falling away from the church. Pero there will be a remnant. There will be some who will continue to believe. Hindi yon total apostasy. Hindi yon great apostasy kasi palagi may mananatiling faithful sa simbahan. Palagi may mananatiling kaanib ng Santa Iglesia Romana Katolika. Yun ang turo dating Catholics. We are not discounting the possibility of apostasy. In fact, right now, come to think of it, there is already a spirit of apostasy inside the church. So many Catholics rejecting Catholic doctrine. Diba? How many Catholics today really believe in the teachings of the church? Palagi natin sinasabi, Philippines, 80% Catholic, but how many of these Catholics actually believe in the doctrines of the church? Diba? How many, especially among the educated, would say na Katoliko ako, pero hindi ako naniniwala dito, hindi ako naniniwala dyan. Madami, ang daming ganun. So yes, it is true. There is always a danger of apostasy, but there is never a danger that apostasy will completely destroy the church. So that's the first thing to keep in mind. Whatever bad happens inside the church herself will never completely disappear or fail. Which means also that at any given time in the history of the church, there will always be laymen, faithful laymen, and there will always be faithful bishops and priests. Kasi ang church cannot exist without a hierarchy. And obviously, the church cannot exist without a laity. So there will always be some faithful bishops, and there will always be some faithful laity. Okay. Next slide. Yeah. See Constantine's the First Council of Nicaea. Next slide, please. A variant of the great apostasy legend is that it was the Roman Empire that corrupted. Okay, it was the Roman Empire that corrupted Christianity. Essentially, ang turo ang paniniwalang ito is like this. During the first 300 years, daw, the church was pure. It was pure because it was persecuted underground, in the catacombs. Finally, Constantine legalized Christianity, and it was when Christianity was legalized that it became corrupt. Yun yung isang variant ng great apostasy. And by the way, some Catholics also believe this. You will sometimes hear Catholic writers and theologians talk as if the legalization of the church by Constantine was a bad thing. Para ba ini-imply na sana persecuted na lang tayo palagi, no? But we have to look at things from a very nuanced point of view. This is ako kanina, nuanced, no? Accepting that there's a mixture of good and bad in the church, accepting na the church exists here on earth. So it has to be faithful to its principles, but it also has to be pragmatic. It also has to be, sometimes kailangan ring magkompromiso sa mga bagay that do not affect its doctrine. So may mga nagsasabi rin daw na it was Constantine who forced the church to invent the divinity of Christ. Kung yung nagkakamali, si Dan Brown yata isa sa mga pinaka-famous na purveyors ng paniniwala na to. Kasi sa Council of Nicaea daw, inimbento ang Biblia at ang Catholic Church. At yung finally man nagsasabi na Constantine made the church an instrument of Roman imperial power and religion, And thus what happened was real Christianity disappeared. Next slide, please. Okay. The first thing to keep in mind is that Constantine legalized Christianity, or of course the Catholic Church, in the year 313 AD. Noong time na yon, yung core doctrines ng simbahan nabuo na. What happened later was simply yung codification, yung paggawa ng mga creeds natin, yung mga Nicene Creed, Nicene Constantinopolitan Creed, Athanasian Creed. Pero the doctrines themselves, buo na sila. The divinity of Christ is clearly taught in the Gospel of John. In fact, in the Gospel of John, madalas dun sa English, if I'm not mistaken, sa John chapter 1, verse 18. But it says, the only begotten Son of God. In the original Greek, it actually says, only begotten God. It's a bit more blatant in Greek, yung divinity ni Cristo, which is why, to this very day, Greek Christians, of course, they're overwhelmingly Greek Orthodox, the one thing they will never surrender on is the divinity of Christ, because the divinity of Christ is extremely clear in the teachings, in the text of the New Testament. So, St. Ignatius even called Jesus God 16 times in his seven surviving letters. So, what really happened in the time of Constantine? This is what happened. First and foremost, we need to get rid of the idea, which I know is very popular among Christians, even among many Catholics, that the Catholic Church was totally persecuted for the first 3 centuries. Okay. The fact is, the persecution tended to be sporadic, localized. Nagkaroon ng persecution ng Christians kay Nero, 64 AD. Nagkaroon ng persecution sa kanyang successors, sila Vespasian, Trajan, Domitian. Nagkaroon ng mga persecution. But these were sporadic persecutions, meaning it was not like wherever you are in the Roman Empire, kung Kristiyano ka, patay ka. It also depended to a great extent on the local authorities. And in fact, the Emperor Trajan instituted a principle na a Christian cannot be persecuted unless he is specifically denounced by a pagan. Which is why, kung babasahin niyo, for instance, yung martyrdom account ni Polycarp of Smyrna, which dates back to 156 AD, may kita mo doon, the Christians openly collected his remains after he had been martyred. Kasi simply acting as a Christian in public did not necessarily mean that you will be killed. It was only if a pagan specifically denounced you that you would be subject to persecution by the Roman authorities. The real great persecution began in the middle of the 3rd century, beginning with the Emperor Decius, Decius. Beginning with the Emperor Decius, you had a series of empire-wide persecutions that lasted around 64 years, 250 AD up until 314 AD. But even that was sporadic. No? It depended on how willing the local governors and the local officials were eager to persecute Christians. So because of this, while Christianity was persecuted and there were numerous martyrs, the Christian church also was growing. You have to see this in the context of what happened in the Roman Empire. By the 3rd century, the Roman Empire was collapsing. Collapsing economically, in terms of values, morals. By the 3rd century, actually, yung classic na Greco-Roman myths na alam natin had been largely discredited in the minds and the eyes of the people. They were looking for something new. They were looking for something more religiously. Initially, the Romans, they went to yung mga cult of Mithras, yung mga cult of Isis, yan yung mga pinupuntahan nila. But Christianity was something different. Diba? It was something, on one hand, extremely absurd. Kaya nga sabi ng isa sa mga early church fathers, si Tertullian, I believe because it is absurd. On one hand, Christianity is so absurd. Isipin mo, God, naging tao, tapos namatay. That was totally against the grain of Greco-Roman thinking. But precisely because it seemed so unreal, it also offered salvation. It also offered grace. Yung experience of simply seeing yung Christians loving each other and so strongly believing and withdrawing from secular life, that was one of the reasons why Christianity grew. The persecutions came about, the great persecutions beginning with the Emperor Decius came about precisely because the empire was collapsing. Kailangan maghanap ng scapegoat ng mga emperor. So, they came upon the expedient of blaming the Christians. Kasi itong mga Kristiyano, ayaw na sambahin yung ating mga Diyos-Diyosan. So, yung mga gods, nagagalit na sila. The gods, nagagalit na sila. And sa totoo lang, to escape persecution, all that you had to do, once you were accused of being Christian, was to appear before the officials, offer a bit of incense to the emperor or to the gods, and that was it. But of course, the Christians refused to do that. They refused to commit any act of idolatry. And so they continued to suffer greater persecution. But the more they were persecuted, the more Christianity grew. Kasi the Romans, they have an inherent admiration for bravery and for being firm with their principles. For the Romans, seeing these Christians getting tortured and killed en masse, all the more proof that their faith must have been true. It must have something in it. So nangyari, more and more attractions ang napunta. Constantine finally legalized Christianity. Ngayon, yung legalization of Christianity by Constantine is very controversial among scholars. May mga nagsasabi na kaya daw niya ginawa to because of political expediency, for the simple reason that Christianity was already the strongest religion around in terms of its cohesion, in terms of its unity. But personally, I still believe in the traditional explanation, which is what you also find in the writings of Eusebius and other early church historians, which is that he really had a vision in the year 312. As he was about to fight the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, he had a vision or a dream. Nakita niya yung cross, of course, with a P. And nakalagay doon, by this sign you shall conquer. Constantine was baptized at his deathbed in 337, but essentially from the time he legalized Christianity, he made it clear that Christianity was the favored religion of the empire. Now, was this a good thing or a bad thing? Let's look at the evidence. And I want you to listen carefully because what happened in the time after Constantine remains the template on how to weigh relations between the church and state until today. Si Constantine, binigyan niya ng maraming privileges yung simbahan. Binigyan niya ng mga malaking simbahan, Lateran Basilica, St. Peter's Basilica. Yung Lateran Basilica still survives. St. Peter's Basilica was demolished in the 16th century, pinalitan nung mas malaking basilica ngayon. Under Constantine, the bishops had great authority and influence. And of course, he himself got involved in helping organize the church. He even preached sermons, and not many people know that. Now, some people say that this was an unacceptable compromise on the part of the church. Na masyadong kinompromiso ng mga obispo at ng mga fathers of the church yung simbahan in having a deal with Constantine. But then, at the same time, consider the benefits. Because Constantine favored the church, a lot of Romans now sought baptism. They wanted to be Christian. Cool maging Christian. Suportado ng Estado ang bagay Kristiyano. Di magkikristyano tayo. Reflecting on it, is that really such a bad thing? If we really believe that the church is the ark of salvation, then we should be happy when people join the church, even when they join it for less than noble reasons, di ba? Like personal advancement or kasi yan ang type or kasi yan ang uso. The important thing is pumasok sila. Then, whatever is impure or not noble in their intentions can be purified once they are inside the church. The attitude kasi minsan, there's this perennial tendency among Catholics to want to be super pure. Na gusto natin yung mga ano lang, no, yung mga banal lang, yung mga sumusunod lang, yung mga loyal lang, yung mga orthodox lang ang nasa simbahan. But the fact is, even though that's going to make life easier for many of us, the fact is the church is intended to be an ark for everybody. This is where you find salvation, in the church. So, in retrospect, the church may have in some ways probably compromised in the sense na pumayag ito na yung magkaroon ng trappings of wealth, trappings of power. Probably in the long run, some of these were not beneficial to the church. But the important thing about the Constantinian legalization of the church was you had Romans coming in droves to be baptized. And once they were inside, you know what? They proved to be loyal Christians. Anong proof dito? When was Christianity legalized? 313, 314 AD. In the year 361 AD, which is what? Around 47, 48 years later, well within a lifetime, another pagan emperor came to power, si Julian the Apostate. He tried to restore paganism. Did he succeed? No. Why? Because by then, the people had become faithful Christians. That was a huge achievement. Na in 2 generations, in one lifetime, the Roman Empire had become Christian. And that was thanks to Constantine. That was thanks to Constantine. Pangalawa, because of the peace, or rather the recognition given by Constantine, the church now had the time and the motivation to thresh out yung doctrine niya to an extent not possible before. Kaya nga, napansin nyo, nung 4th at 5th centuries, that is when you had the great ecumenical councils. Nicaea, Constantinople, Ephesus, Chalcedon. These were the great councils. Nangyari yan nung right after the legalization kasi the church now had the opportunity to sit down, discuss, develop, thresh out, enrich its doctrine. Malaking achievement yun, di ba? But the best proof that the Constantinian legalization of the church was good was the fact that after the legalization of the church, you had this great host of church fathers. There was actually an outpouring of holiness in the church. Yung mga desert fathers, hindi naman nung time of persecution yun. Well, some were, like Paul the Hermit, but most of them came after Constantine. On one hand, it was a reaction to the extreme, to the influx of many new Christians who were nominal. Parang a lot of Christians, they wanted to have the opportunity for a more pure monastic life. But take note what they did. They did not do it by telling the new Christians to get out. They did not do it by telling the new Christians that they were not worthy to be part of the church. They did it by themselves withdrawing to the deserts in order to spend their lives in prayer. That's what the good effects of the Constantinian legalization were. Now, this is still extremely important. I'm going to give you, sabi ko nga kanina, nung umpisa ako na, I'm going to jump back and forth. Kasi I want to illustrate yung relevance sa mga pinag-uusapan ko. We're talking about the early Christians. Siguro nababalitaan nyo na there is now the possibility that the Vatican and China might come to an agreement. Diba? They might come to an agreement. Na baka pumayag ang Vatican na the Chinese government will have a role to play in the choosing of bishops. Of course, the Vatican will still have the final say. But part of the selection process may involve yung church. Now, on one hand, you have some, such as Cardinal Zen, the retired bishop of Hong Kong, who are saying that this is bad for the church, that this is going to harm the church, because this is going to give the communists influence in the church in China. On the other hand, you also have some voices who point out that at least this will give the church in China space to finally develop and evangelize more openly. And to be honest about this, is just my personal opinion. Some of you may have a different opinion. I'm not imposing my opinion, I'm just telling you. Ako, looking at how the Constantinian age developed, as long as the Pope has the final say on who gets appointed bishop, I think for the sake of the Chinese people who need to be evangelized, I think a certain amount of compromise is okay. You know? Ako kasi, para sa akin, ang nakikita ko, di ba, palagi natin narinig na dumadami ang Kristiyano sa China. What those reports don't usually mention is that the great majority of those Christians are Pentecostalists and evangelicals, not Catholic. Because the Catholics, they couldn't evangelize very much kasi nga, hindi sila recognized by the government. If the church could be recognized by the Chinese government, even within certain political constraints, as long as it is Rome that has the final say on the bishops, I think it's acceptable. Kasi what's important is to get more people into the church. And then whatever problems they bring into the church will be sorted out in the church. You never sort out any problems outside the church. You have to try to sort everything inside the church. Okay. So, yun lang. Opinion ko lang yun. I know that perhaps some of you have a different opinion. But just to show why the principles he enunciated in the time of Constantine are still relevant. Yung how to weigh yung official favor or recognition on one hand with the need to evangelize on the other. In our own history here in the Philippines, the Constantinian principle is also evident. Alam niyo ba na hanggang 1898 ang nag-a-appoint ng parish priest sa Pilipinas, hindi yung mga obispo? Ang nag-a-appoint ng parish priests dito yung Governor General. It was called the Patronato Real. There was a church, but the state had close control over the church here in the Philippines, the Spanish state. Now, because of that, some have been very critical of that. Sabi na corrupt daw yung church sa Philippines because of that. On the other hand, come to think of it, without the strong support of the Spanish government, the Philippines would probably not have been evangelized the way it was. It probably would not be the Catholic country it now is. So, iwe-weigh mo. Ano ba yung mas importante? Na manatiling pure yung simbahan in the sense na totally walang government involvement? Or at least na evangelize mong karamihan ng mga Pilipino? That is one of the great principles that will play out over and over and over and over again in the history of the church. Now, minsan, in Catholic apologetics, kinikriticize natin yung mga Anglicans because of the fact that they're a church controlled by the state. Now, there's a huge difference between the Catholic Church and the Anglicans. First and foremost, sa Anglicans, Parliament has a say, not just in who becomes bishop, but even when it comes to their doctrines. Sa Anglicans, yung ordination ng women as priests and as bishops, dumaan sa Parliament nila yon. Tayo mga Katoliko, one thing we will never compromise on is doctrine. The church will allow the state a role, they will allow the government a role, but never a role in determining doctrine. That's the important distinction. Second, sa England, ang nag-a-appoint ng mga bishops nila, yung prime minister acting in the name of the queen or the king. Sa Catholic Church, may mga ganun ding instances. For example, ang Archbishop of Strasbourg to this very day, ang nag-a-appoint sa kanya, President of France. But the principle is always, the Pope always has a say. The Pope always has the final say in any episcopal appointment. Which means that the church will always have a mechanism to prevent extremely unworthy individuals, even enemies of the church, from becoming bishops. Okay. So you see, very relevant talaga yung pag-aralan mo yung history kasi yung history ng church usually deals with issues na nauulit palagi. In the time of Constantine and his successors, they were, it is true, involved in helping organize the church, but they were never decisive in making doctrinal decisions. That was always the role of the patriarchs, especially the Pope of Rome, and of the bishops. That's the important thing to keep in mind about the Roman Empire. Okay. Next slide. Finally, to keep in mind, although Constantine legalized Christianity, yung mga emperors na sumunod sa kanya were actually more or less ambivalent. Now, from time to time, they would persecute the Catholic Church kasi some of them favored Arianism. Now, before I launch into that, I think I need to explain what Arianism is kasi napapansin ko a lot of Catholic apologists misuse the term Arian. Arianism is not the belief that Jesus is a man, which is why it is not accurate to describe the Iglesia ni Manalo as Arian. Okay. Arianism believed that Jesus Christ is a sort of lesser divinity. Para siyang junior God or lesser God. Yun ang paniniwala ng mga Arians. He was of like substance as the Father. Pansin niyo yung distinction. Like substance as the Father. Tayong Katoliko believe consubstantial as the Father. Or of the same substance as the Father. Ang Arians, like substance as the Father. If you understand that, you'll also understand why in 381, when there was a Council of Constantinople, most of the Arian bishops actually easily converted to Catholicism, which is why there's no Arian church after 381 in the Roman Empire. The reason for that is, from like substance to same substance, it's just a small jump. It's just a small theological jump. Once ma-convince mo yung mga Arians na the Gospel of John and the New Testament clearly imply that the second person of the Trinity is as fully God as the Father, maikling jump na lang yon to believe that He is of the same substance as the Father. The triumph of Catholicism actually came with Theodosius the Great, the last man to rule the whole Roman Empire. And yet when Theodosius massacred thousands of people in 390 AD, he was forced by St. Ambrose to do penance, which also shows to you that the church continued to exercise independence from the state when it came to doctrinal or main principles. Okay. Next slide. Okay. Ito isa pang palaging na pag-uusapan, Inquisition. Now, before I start, I'm going to begin with a rather bastos na anecdote. Pagpasensyahan nyo na ako. Huwag kayong ma-shock. There was an Inquisition in the Philippines. There was an Inquisition here. Although the Inquisition, the tribunal of the Inquisition here was not empowered to give death sentences. Only the tribunal in Mexico and Spain could do that. There was one case here in the Philippines in the 18th century of a Jesuit priest. Jesuit agad ito. Of a Jesuit priest who claimed that he was so holy, that he had attained such a high level of personal holiness, that he would mash the breasts of the Tagalog beatas, yung mga nasa beaterio, mga beaterio, like yung kanilang Mother Ignacia. Ganon. Yung mga, he would come there and basically abuse them, but he would feel nothing daw. He would have no sexual feelings kasi napaka-holy daw niya. And the Inquisition got him, arrested him, put him in jail. Which goes to show to you, at that time, the Inquisition was a way of protecting. It was a way of protecting the Tagalog, the Indios, in this case, the Indio Beatas, from this sexual predator of a priest, na Castilla. And if I'm not mistaken, in the 18th century, the commissar of the Holy Office in Manila was, one of the commissaries of the Holy Office of the Inquisition was in fact a full-blooded Indio, one of the full-blooded Indio priests. So the Inquisition, you see, starting from that anecdote, was far more complicated than simply a machinery for killing heretics. First and foremost, it resorted to the death penalty only as a last resort. And then you also have to see it in context. When was the Inquisition founded? The Inquisition was founded in the 13th century. Okay. It was founded in the 13th century. Why was it founded? It was founded in the aftermath of the Albigensian heresy, or the Cathar heresy in France. So why? Why was it founded? The Cathar heresy, you see, advocated the view that there are two gods, a good God and an evil God. And the evil God is the one who created this world. And the greatest way, therefore, to be holy is to not just deny yourself all physical pleasures, but also to eventually commit suicide by starvation in order to completely and totally free yourself from all attachment to the world. That was the teaching of the Cathar heretics. And the Cathars had a lot of followers. They had a lot of followers. Why? First and foremost, they seemed so spiritual. Palagi nagfa-fasting, palaging poor, may poverty sila. Compared to what seemed to be a very rich church, they looked more credible. Of course, yung look of credibility na yon was devastating kasi they were essentially teaching people that this world was useless and they should, the best way for them to pass away from this world is to kill themselves by self-starvation. Essentially, the Cathar heresy was not just a doctrinal heresy. It was something that really threatened the existence of civilization as they knew it. Isipin mo, a religion that actually advocates suicide. Okay lang kung tiny minorities sila. Paano when they were already beginning to convert powerful nobles, aristocrats, leaders? Siguro kung nagtagumpay ang Albigensian heresy, there would be no Europe today. They'd probably have committed suicide long ago. No? Mass suicide sila. So to stamp out the heresy, first and foremost, you had preachers. The Dominican order was founded partly to combat the Albigensian heresy. But when that did not prove sufficient, there was a crusade, the Albigensian crusade. And in the aftermath of the crusade, to make sure that the heresy was completely stamped out, the Inquisition was set up. Now, you have to understand the Albigensians, as I mentioned them, as I described them, were by no means peaceful men. They set up fortresses. Kaya nga nagkaroon ng crusade kasi naging armed yung resistance nila. So, faced by a heresy that seemed capable of destroying civilization, the church mobilized the Inquisition. It might sound harsh for a time, but you have to remember that 800 years ago, nag-uumpisa pa lang yung rediscovery ng Roman law, nag-uumpisa pa lang yung rediscovery ng mga legal processes as we know them, and they were faced with something really destructive. It's easy to condemn. It's easy to condemn them. But perhaps they did what they did because they felt it was the only way to save civilization. Exactly how do we judge them? Mahirap. No? You know, in history, mahirap talaga manghusga eh. It's always so difficult to judge in history. But at least maintindihan natin yung context. It was not like the church all of a sudden just decided to set up tribunals so it can kill peaceful heretics. No, that's not how it happened. It set up these tribunals to fight a heresy that was in danger of destroying Christian civilization by its principles. Also, another thing to keep in mind was that until the 19th century, as a general rule, loyalty to the church and loyalty to the state went together. Makita ito sa history time and time again. I don't have the time to get into all of the details, but basically, if you're a heretic and you live in a Catholic state, you are far more liable to plot against the Catholic government because you wanted to bring it down. Of course, sometimes Catholics did the same thing when they lived in non-Catholic governments. So you have to see yung use of violence in the name of the church in that context. Another context is Spain. There was a Spanish Inquisition. It was set up in 1480. And all of us may have heard of Torquemada, burning 2,000 people alive. And on one hand, parang, how can you even justify that? And that's a good question. No one is trying to justify it today. I'm definitely not saying na, oh, maganda yung ginawa niya. But we have to put things in context palagi. In 1480, Spain as we know it did not yet exist. You had Isabella, Queen of Queen of Castile, and you had Ferdinand of Aragon marrying together, bringing their two kingdoms together, and they were faced with what? They were faced by Granada, which at the time was still Muslim. So they pressed forward. Granada fell in 1492. So you suddenly had a situation where you had huge numbers of Muslims inside the Catholic Kingdom of Spain. Initially, they were not completely, totally persecuted. But the fact is, they often cooperated with outside forces, lalo-lalo na yung Ottoman Empire, whose navy at the time would traverse the Mediterranean Sea. So, in that situation, what did you do? The Inquisition was essentially an attempt not just to ensure that everybody was Catholic. It was an attempt to ensure that the Spanish kingdom survived various threats to its internal existence from inside. Challenges that it faced from various heretics, from the Moriscos or the Muslims who pretended to be converted but were still Muslim inside. yun yung mga extremely difficult cases that they had to face. And I would like to point out that compared to most tribunals of the time, they were extremely lenient. For instance, the Spanish Inquisition killed noong time ni Torquemada, he executed an estimated 2,000 people out of 100,000 accused of heresy. Now, 2,000 might be is extremely high for our times, no? I mean, extremely high for our standards. But in the standards of the time, that was humane. In fact, the Marxist historian Henry Kamen even noted in his research that in Spain, from the 16th up until the 19th century, many people who were imprisoned in the civil prisons would sometimes say blasphemous or heretical things, so they would be transferred to the Inquisition because the prisons of the Inquisition were better. So ito yung mga complex na mga bagay ng Inquisition. Okay, next slide. Okay. One thing to understand about the Inquisition, by the way, is that it never compromised the infallibility of the church. Why? There was never at any time of the history of the church a dogma which said, we are obliged to believe that heretics must be killed. We never had a dogma like that. Or we're obliged to believe that heretics must be persecuted. Never nagkaroon ng dogma na ganon. The Inquisition, for all of its excesses, for all of its use of violence, was always a prudential act of the church. Meaning, it was always something that the church could choose to end if it wanted to. It was never doctrine. And indeed, by 1834, the Spanish Inquisition was abolished. Okay. Next slide. Okay. In 2004, an 800-page study commissioned by the Vatican found that Spanish Inquisition killed only 1.8% of those it tried from 1480 until the 19th century. The death toll was no more than 5,000. Compare that with the estimated 70,000 Catholics and Protestants killed in the time of Elizabeth I and Henry VIII. No, I'm not saying na okay na naman na mas konti yung pinatay natin kasi mas maraming pinatay yung mga Protestante. It's not that. My point here is to put everything in context. If Protestants attack us or criticize us for having the Inquisition, anong tawag natin dun sa mga pinagpapatay ng mga Katoliko ng mga Protestante noong 16th century? Diba? Do you know that even here in the Philippines it happened? In 1762, when the British conquered Manila and controlled it for 2 years, what did the British do? They sacked all of the churches, which is why almost nothing is left of the treasures of Manila pre-1762. They sacked all the churches. Ang description nga sa San Agustin, pagkatapos ng mga after the British had sacked San Agustin, ni walang maupuan yung mga praile. Ganun katindi yung pagnakaw. And then, not only that, they also deported and exiled many of the friars in Manila to distant lands. So there's also persecution by Protestants. We need to keep in mind, religious persecution was considered normal by all parties until the 19th century. Is that unfortunate? Yes, it's unfortunate when we look back. Did it result in a lot of errors and mistakes? Yes, it resulted in a lot of errors and mistakes. I want to make this clear. Let's not fall into the error of saying na walang maling ginawa ang Inquisition. Some Catholic apologists fall into that error. We're not saying that. Yes, the Inquisition made a lot of mistakes, but it has to be put in context. The Inquisition was to a great extent part of the painful process of Europe establishing legal processes and of Europe establishing the internal cohesion of its countries, lalo-lalo ang Spain, France, Italy. It's possible that Spain and France would not even exist kung wala yung if the Inquisition had not done its job, kasi they would have been destroyed from inside by conflicts between the church and heretics. That's what would have happened. The Crusades were begun in the year 1096 AD. Now you have to understand, kailan ba nag-umpisa ang Islam? It started in the 7th century. So Islam started the 7th century. By the time Muhammad died around 632 AD, he controlled much of Arabia. Then his followers swept into what is now the Middle East, Palestine, Egypt, and conquered most of that within a single decade. And of course, after that, they swept into Anatolia, which is now Turkey. They besieged Constantinople twice, in 678 AD and again in 717 AD. So, first and foremost, we need to keep in mind that Christianity was in a defensive mode against Islam for hundreds of years. Islam was really a religion spread by the sword. It was a religion spread by the sword. Not in the sense that they forced everybody to convert to Islam. That didn't happen at first. Eventually, it would happen. But initially, hindi siya yung tipong kaya nag-convert lahat ng mga tao sa Middle East to Islam is because of the point of the sword. Hindi sa ganon. But the Muslims had a much more subtle way of inviting conversions. It was through the jizya. Essentially, if you're not Muslim, you pay the tax. You pay the special tax na medyo mabigat. And of course, the jizya, the issue of jizya is not yet dead. If you have been reading about ISIS now in Iraq and Syria, they have imposed extremely harsh jizya on the remaining Christians in their territory. So it's still a living principle among Muslim fundamentalists today, yung jizya or yung tax. And of course, a lot of the Christians, initially they resisted. It is estimated that for the first 300 years or so of Muslim rule, the majority of people in Egypt and Syria continued to be Christians actually. But eventually, as Muslim rule became harsher and harsher and harsher, mas madami yung bumigay at nag-Muslim na lang kesa mag-put up with the taxes and the persecution and all that stuff. It is a great miracle that to this very day in Egypt, as much as 10% and probably 20% of the population is still Christian. Mga Copts, mga Coptic. And they have done that by being extremely strict. The Copts survive by being extremely strict. They fast more than half the year, for instance. Tapos ang mga Copts, they have a practice of tattooing a cross on their hands. Kaya wala ka talagang takas. No? Alam ng lahat na Kristiyano ka. And it was their way of establishing their identity against the extreme harshness of Islamic rule. Talaga sa sala, Kristiyano kami. I'm sure napanood niyo yung diba, yung video. Many of you may have watched yung video ng 21 Coptic martyrs na pinatay sa Libya. Yung sabay-sabay na pinugutan. Ang tangengot ng mga ISIS, sino man ng kanilang IT technician, hindi na-erase yung final cries ng mga Copts. They were crying out the name of Jesus as they were being killed. Kaya nga the Coptic Church canonized them immediately as martyrs kasi klarong-klaro yung martyrdom nila. Now, going back to my topic, yung Crusades should be seen in the context of hundreds of years of continuous Muslim expansion. You had the Muslims conquering Syria, conquering Mesopotamia, conquering Egypt, conquering North Africa, and destroying the church there totally, by the way. Which is why, kung magbabasa kayo ng early Christians, may mga bishop of Carthage, may mga bishops in what is now Libya, yung Cyrenaica dati. Simon the Cyrene, Cyrene is from Cyrenaica, that's what is now Libya. There was a flourishing church in North Africa that was totally destroyed by the Muslims. In the 8th century, they invaded Spain. They invaded Spain and subjugated the Christians there for hundreds of years. Natalo lang yung mga Muslim in the year 732 in the Battle of Tours when they were turned back by the Franks. And also in 717 AD when they were turned back in Constantinople by Emperor Leo III. So, but even then, that did not stop the constant wars, the constant raids, the constant battles. And ultimately, as Islamic rule became harsher and more rigid, as you would say, it began to threaten the safety of pilgrims from Christendom. Pilgrims going to Jerusalem to pay a visit to the Holy Sepulchre. In fact, the Church of Holy Sepulchre was destroyed in the 11th century by a caliph, the Caliph al-Hakim. It was rebuilt later on by the Crusaders. The Crusades began as a defensive war. What happened was, in the late 11th century, the Muslims had briefly conquered practically all of Anatolia, or Asia Minor, what is now Turkey. They were practically at the gates of Constantinople. Because of that, the Emperor Alexius I sent a letter to the Pope asking for aid. And the Pope, in turn, exhorted the West to come and march to the aid of the to march to the aid of the East Roman or Byzantine Empire in fighting the Muslims. Of course, Urban II had another reason for doing that. You see, by the late 11th century, there was already a very strong feudal aristocracy developing in Europe. And they had a tendency to fight each other, mga petty feudal wars. To divert their energies away from fighting each other, what better way than to sick them on the Muslims who were trying to attack Europe, di ba? So that's what happened. They marched to the east. They marched to Jerusalem, and in 1099 they conquered Jerusalem, the First Crusade, which was the only successful crusade, by the way. And after that, the Crusader kingdoms persisted for another 2 centuries. There was a kingdom in Jerusalem until 1187, and the last Crusader state fell only in 1291. In the city of Acre or Acre, A-C-R-E ang spelling. Now the Crusaders, once they came to Palestine, they set up the Crusader kingdoms. But one thing they were noted for, guess what, is tolerance. They were very religiously tolerant. They did not persecute or kill the Muslims in their realms. Of course, they killed Muslims in battle, but not during peacetime. And the Crusades were there primarily to ensure that Christians had safe access to Jerusalem. It was also as a bulwark against continued Muslim expansion. Kasi kung hindi tinatag yung mga Crusader kingdoms for 200 years in Palestine, it is highly possible that the Muslims would have continued severe attacks against Europe throughout that time. It was precisely during the time of the Crusader kingdoms that the medieval ages reached what is called the high medieval ages. Talaga nag-flourish yung Catholic civilization ng Western Europe ng 12th or 13th centuries. And that was partly because of the reduction in hostilities brought about, paradoxically enough, by the Crusades. Kumbaga, by conquering Jerusalem, by conquering much of the Palestinian coast, nawalan ng foothold yung mga Muslims from which to attack the West even further. The Christians also, of course, the Christians in the West also reconquered Sicily and Sardinia from the Muslims as well as Cyprus. These are very important things to consider. So the Crusades actually, paradoxically enough, resulted not in greater violence, but in greater peace. Dahil sa Crusades, more or less, nabawasan yung threat mula sa mga Muslim that helped to develop yung civilization sa Western Europe. By the time the Crusader countries, by the time the Crusader kingdoms completely fell, Western Europe was sufficiently strong to begin its development. Its long, long march to development and to supremacy in the world. So, but again, it started as a defensive tactic. Kung titingnan naman talaga ang history ng mga wars between Christians and Muslims, as a general rule, it's the Christians defending themselves against the Muslims, not the other way around. Kahit naman dito sa Pilipinas, nainis ako pag palagi ko naririnig yung mga Kastila na inapi at inatake yung mga Moro. Ang tanong, bakit ba nila ginagawa yun? Why were the Spaniards trying to subjugate Sulu and Maguindanao? Simple lang. And they kept attacking the Christian settlements in Luzon and Visayas eh. Do we think the Spaniards would just have sat on their hands and say, we're Christian, we're peaceful? Hindi nila gagawin yan, di ba? That's absurd. I mean, they attacked Sulu, they tried to subjugate Sulu in Maguindanao because they wanted to prevent continued Muslim piratical attacks on the Christian settlements of the Philippines. And that is a story we read again and again and again and again. For example, Feast of the Holy Rosary. Bakit may Feast of the Holy Rosary sa October 7? Kasi it marks the Battle of Lepanto. When Muslim forces were stopped by the Christians from advancing further. Kasi at that time, in 1571, the Muslims had just reconquered Cyprus from the Muslims had just reconquered Cyprus from the Christians. They were based in Greece. They were threatening to invade Italy. So to prevent any possibility of that, you had the Battle of Lepanto, during which the Muslim fleet was destroyed. It did not necessarily completely stop the Muslim advance, which is why in 1683 you had the Battle of Vienna, which was won on September 12, which is why September 12 is the Feast of the Holy Name of Mary. Yung Feast of the Holy Name of Mary in September 12 is actually a memorial of the Battle of Vienna. The Battle of Vienna marks the high point of the Islamic advance into Europe. That was by weapons. Now, they're advancing into Europe again through uncontrolled immigration. But that's another topic. Di ba nababasa niyo siguro, di ba, yung nangyayari, ang dami-daming migrants na Muslim na pumupunta sa Western Europe, pero karamihan sa kanila mga lalaki. And once they're in, what happens? They practice mass rape. They commit a lot of crimes against the Christians in Europe. They're spreading. Unfortunately, because of political correctness, the Europeans themselves don't seem to have the energy to do anything about it. So, again, yung context palagi dapat natin tingnan. Okay, church and science. Talaga, sa totoo lang, hirap talaga nitong church history kasi ang dami, no? Ang daming topics. Ang isang palagi na pag-uusapan sa church and science, yung issues ng heliocentrism, na yung, di ba, yung sun, not the earth, is at the center of the solar system, and yung tinatawag the flat earth myth. Of course, sa heliocentrism, ang mga heroes dyan, si Copernicus at si Galileo. The first thing to keep in mind is that both Copernicus and Galileo were Catholic. And not just that, but they were devout Catholics. Copernicus, for instance, was a man of the church. He was actually a canon of the cathedral in his place, in Warmia. And he was buried in the Cathedral of Frombork. Not only was he never attacked, he was always in the good graces and favor of the church. Kaya nga siya linibing sa katedral eh. Then in 1533, yung kanyang theory of heliocentrism was the topic of a lecture in the presence of Pope Clement VII. And the lecturer was even rewarded by the Pope. And of course, yung kanyang book that really encapsulates yung kanyang heliocentric theory was dedicated to Pope Paul III. Would you do that if the Catholic Church is an enemy of science or an enemy of heliocentrism as such? No. Okay. Next slide, please. Now, not many people realize this, but the Spanish Inquisition had a lot of autonomy from the Roman Inquisition. So the Spanish Inquisition could make its own decisions on which books to ban and which teachings to ban. The Spanish Inquisition, which in terms of land mass covered more than half of the Catholic world at the time, began allowing heliocentrism as early as the 16th century. Ang medyo nagtagal was the Roman Inquisition. Yun yung nagpunish kay Galileo. Although it's important to keep in mind that Galileo's quote-unquote punishment was not harsh. He was never tortured. He was never maltreated. He was kept in what was essentially a pleasant form of house arrest in a villa. Next slide, please. One of the reasons why Galileo, by the way, was punished was not just because he taught heliocentrism. One thing to keep in mind is that, if anything, if the church punished Galileo, it was not because the church was against scientific theory, but because the church was the church saw itself as a defender of science. Noong 17th century and up until well into the 18th century, science continued to be dominated by the teaching of Aristotle and the Greek scientists, including Ptolemy. And of course, the Ptolemaic universe was geocentric. The Earth is at the center. And yung mga, at that time, yung mathematical and astronomical data was considered by many astronomers to be insufficient until the 18th century to actually prove heliocentrism. So the tendency in many Catholic colleges and universities, actually the bulk of Catholic academe outside of the Spanish realm, the tendency was to stick to the Aristotelian and Ptolemaic scientific consensus. Kasi ang pagkakala nila, yun ang established science eh. Diba? Kaya nga, some of you might remember when Pope Francis endorsed the climate change theory last year, there were some Catholics who were who warned against it kasi sabi nila, we don't want the church again to be in the business of trying to determine what settled science is. Kasi we already got burned in the time of the 17th century. So, ang point dito is, if anything, the sin of the church, quote unquote, the problem of the church in the 17th century when it came to Galileo and heliocentrism was not because the church was against science, but probably because it believed too much in the settled science of the day, which was geocentric. So most astronomers and physicists of the time disagreed with Copernicus on mathematical and scientific grounds rather than theological grounds. And I want to point out, hindi lang po ito Catholics. Until the 1920s and the 1930s, there were Lutheran scientists and theologians who did not believe in heliocentrism. And nabasa ko recently na in the United States, there are actually many evangelicals who do not believe in heliocentrism. So don't say it's just the Catholics who have this problem. So Galileo did not just challenge the geocentric theory. He challenged the entire Aristotelian account of astronomy. And pwede mo sabihin na in the time of Galileo, what happened was the church saw itself as defending proper science against him, against this upstart who was trying to upset yung established science of the time. Next slide, please. Finally, by 1820, klarong dineclare ng Holy See na walang problema sa heliocentrism. Although, actually, nung 1757 pa lang, tinanggal na yung mga ilang heliocentric works mula sa Index of Forbidden Books. Ito yung text nung decree ng Holy Office. No? And dito, very clear dito, na the church was just waiting for convincing scientific proof na tama ang heliocentrism. Kasi dito nakasabi, His Holiness has decreed that no obstacles exist for those who sustain Copernicus' affirmation regarding the Earth's movement in the manner in which it is affirmed today even by Catholic authors. He has moreover suggested the insertion of several notations into this work, aimed at demonstrating that the above-mentioned affirmation of Copernicus, as it has come to be understood, does not present any difficulties. Here's the very important passage. Difficulties that existed in times past prior to the subsequent astronomical observations that have now occurred. Once there was convincing astronomical proof that heliocentrism was the correct theory, the church had no problem not just allowing, but even prescribing, for all intents and purposes, endorsing heliocentrism. Next slide, please. In some writings, you will see the assertion made that it was only in 1992 that the Catholic Church accepted heliocentrism. That's not true. 1992 was when Pope John Paul II gave a speech to the Pontifical Academy of Sciences where he explained some of the doctrinal principles behind the Church's approach to science and theology. And I would like to point out here na si Pope John Paul II was a great friend of scientists. Hindi pala si Pope John Paul II. Yung predecessor niya, of course, John Paul II was a great friend of science, but so were all of the popes, really. In fact, his predecessor, Paul VI, even gave a medal to Stephen Hawking, who's an atheist. And if you're aware of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, maraming atheist na members ito because the Church rewards and appreciates good science wherever it is found. Okay, next slide. Finally, hindi niyo ba napansin na whenever the supposed conflict between science and religion is brought up against the Catholic Church, palagi na lang yung kaso ni Galileo pinag-uusapan. Kailan pa ba yun? 17th century pa yun. Sabi nga ni John Henry Newman, essentially, the reason why people keep talking about Galileo is because there's really no other argument against the church. He is the exception that proves the rule. Okay? Next slide. Next slide, please. And again, ito yung the church daw is thought that the world is flat. Na ito ay talagang complete and total myth na gawa-gawa lamang noong 19th century ng mga ilang American Protestant and agnostic historians who wanted to discredit the Catholic Church. Mga kano naman naniwala agad. But there's really no proof of this kasi it was taken for granted na the world was a sphere even during the medieval ages. The problem with Columbus, for instance, was never whether the world was round. It was how big the circumference of the earth was. Yun talaga ang point of debate noon. Next slide, please. And this is one proof. In Summa Theologica, St. Thomas Aquinas clearly speaks of the earth as a sphere. Kailan ba yung Summa Theologica? It was the 13th century. Next slide, please. Ito, mas matindi. Si Saint Bede, 8th century AD. Ito, 7th century AD. So, klaro-klaro sinabi niya, the earth is round. Next slide, please. Finally, ito, from the first millennium of Christianity onwards, Christian kings and emperors usually have an orb. If you want to see what an orb looks like, kung meron po kayo Santo Niño de Cebu, he holds one. Diba may maliit na parang bilog yung Santo Niño de Cebu. That actually represents the world. And it's not flat, it's not a disc, it's a sphere. And these are from way before Columbus. They knew, the medievals knew that the world is a sphere, a round sphere. It's round, it's a sphere. So, next slide, please. Before I continue with the Philocratia in the last few minutes available to me, please keep in mind, no, we keep getting trapped kasi into Galileo, into Copernicus. Madalas sila na pag-uusapan is yung dami ng mga Catholic scientists. Okay? For example, are you aware of the Jesuits, for instance, the contributions of the Jesuits to meteorology and to geology? Meteorology and geology. Dito sa Philippines, yung Manila Observatory was historically run by the Jesuits. That alone tells you how important science is for the church and how important the church is to science. yung Big Bang Theory, as some of you may know, pare ang may pakana, si Monsignor George Lemaitre. In our own time, in our own country, Padre Faura was extremely important to establishing weather forecasting in the Philippines. So ang dami-dami po talaga mga Catholic scientists. You only have to read about them carefully. You only have to research and look for them in the internet or in other sources. Kahit nga sa anthropology, you may have heard about yung mga cave paintings ng mga early humans. The greatest connoisseur of cave paintings in the early 20th century was a Catholic priest, the Abbe Bruil. So, maraming mga Catholic scientists all over the centuries. It was a Catholic saint, Saint Albert the Great, Albertus Manius, who is responsible for isolating the element, who is responsible for isolating arsenic in its pure form. So, madami po mga Catholic scientists. The Catholic Church, far from being an enemy of science, is in fact probably the greatest patron of science in the history of the West. Okay. Tanong lang, sino sa inyo ang may mga questions about the Friars? Will any of you have questions about the Friars? Okay. All right. So, alam naman natin yung mga usual na mga myths at legends tungkol sa mga praile, sila Padre Damaso, Padre Salvi, yung mga legendary na mga figures ni Rizal. Na nakakatawa kasi si Salvi at si Damaso, they were never real human beings. And yet, yung storya ni Rizal tungkol sa kanila, ang tinuturing na factual daw or historical na portrayal ng mga praile. Now, you have to understand why the friars were demonized. Here, I explain. The Filipino propagandists felt that the church had to be ruined, destroyed, set aside in order to make the Philippines quote-unquote enlightened and later on independent. This was part of their program. First and foremost, the church was seen to be a pillar of Spanish rule. Although that does not mean na subservient yung Spanish church sa government. And that history was far more complex than that. Pero yung mga praile, you see, yung mga praile, ano sila on one hand, they were loyal Spanish citizens, of course. So we can expect na loyal sila sa Spain. Kastila sila Alangalan namang maging Indio or Filipino nationalists rin sila, di ba? They're Spanish friars. But over and above that, we have to consider, ano ba yung naging gifts or naging contributions ng mga friars to Philippine history, to Philippine heritage. The first question, of course, this question is first answered, of course, by just looking at the churches that we have. And the enormous churches that were set up by the Spanish friars all over the Philippines, na hanggang ngayon pinagmamayabang pa rin natin, pinagmamalaki natin sa ating tourism. Minsan nga hindi ko maintindihan Pinagmamalaki natin yung mga simbahan. Pero kinamumuhian natin yung mga praile na nagtayo ng mga simbahan na yon. Bakit? Either we are proud of them or we are not proud of them. Hindi mo pwede sabihin, I love San Agustin Church, I hate the friars who built it. Yun ang nangyayari. The friars were not perfect. It is true, maraming abusado mga praile. But we need to keep in mind yung kanilang achievements. Isa pa, yung mga propagandista, saan ba sila nag-aral? Yung mga revolutionary, saan ba sila nag-aral? Rizal, Mabini, even Aguinaldo, he spent some time in Letran. Practically all of the propagandists, saan sila nag-aral? Ateneo, UST, or Letran. They all studied in Catholic schools before going to Europe. It was the Catholic schools here that paradoxically gave them the philosophical and ideological foundations for their later writings. Pwede ba sabihin na kung hindi tinuro ng Christianity, ng Katolisismo, yung basic equality ng lahat ng tao, would Rizal or the propagandists have done what they did? Of course not. They were essentially, it is true that they later on rebelled against the church, but it was the church that gave them their foundation. It is the church that gave them their foundation. Sabi nga, ang great difference between Spain and many of the other colonial powers was that Spain gave the intellectual equipment for the revolution on its own. Kumbaga, kung hindi dahil sa Espanya, kung hindi na rin dahil sa intellectual gifts na ibinigay ng Espanya, hindi magkakaroon ng revolution that would later on lead to Philippine independence from Spain. And that's a great paradox. That's a great paradox. But we don't even think about it. Kung wala ang UST, kung wala ang Ateneo, kung wala ang Letran, where would the propagandists have picked up their ideas? Next slide, please. Okay. Later on na yan. Next slide. Minsan nababaluktot yung mga iba't ibang elements in church history. And sa totoo lang, there are so many stories I can tell you about this, kaya lang walang oras. I'll just tell you one. In Apalit, Pampanga, there's a huge church there. Diba? Apalit. Sa labas ng Apalit, Pampanga Church, may courtyard na may 4 na maliliit na kapilya. Actually, hindi nga kapilya para mga nicho lang na malaki. Nababasa ko sa internet at sa mga sari-saring mga pahayagan na kaya daw may ganong 4 na maliliit na nicho kasi ito yung mga kapilya para sa mga Indio kasi hindi sila pwede pumasok sa simbahan. Ang pwede lang daw pumasok sa kalaki-laking simbahan na yon ay ang mga Kastila. I have one word for that story. It's total bullshit. First and foremost, halos walang Kastila doon. Ang mga Kastila lang doon, praile. Hindi sila nagtatag ng simbahan na wala namang papasok. The niches outside were most likely for para-liturgical processions. Kasi ang mga Kastila, mahilig sila sa mga procession that had 4 stops. You want to see another example? Go to San Agustin in the cloister. Yung 4 corners ng San Agustin, may mga altar. Those altars were not used for Mass. They were used as stops for the processions that would go along the cloister. So, where did that absurd story come from na nagtayo yung mga praile ng kalaki-laking simbahan sa Apalit pero hindi daw pwede pumasok yung mga Indio? Hindi ko alam kung saan nakuha yung mga gawa-gawa na yun eh. But that's the problem with our history here in the Philippines. If you don't know anything, you just invent a story about the Spaniards that makes them look evil and you are guaranteed people will believe you. Kasi ang tingin ng mga tao sa Kastila, masama. Ang tingin natin sa mga praile, masama. Just today, my Facebook reminded me that exactly 2 years ago I posted on Facebook against a story that appeared on pepper.ph. The story sa pepper.ph, kaya daw nagdidinuguan ng mga Pilipino kasi yung mga Kastila, kinukuha lahat ng masasarap na parte ng baboy. At tinitira lang sa mga Indio, yung mga laman loob. Again, complete and total BS. There were never more than a few thousand Spaniards in the Philippines at any given time until the final decade of the 19th century. Don't tell me, yung kakonti-konting Kastila na yon, sila umuubos ng lahat ng baboy sa Pilipinas. Diba? Pero, whoever wrote that story obviously thought that she could get away with that kind of lying kasi, yun nga, tayo mga Pilipino, predisposed tayo maniwala. Basta masamang bagay tungkol sa mga praile, paniniwalaan natin. Basta masamang bagay tungkol sa mga Kastila, paniniwalaan natin. Let us be more critical. Let us be more discerning. Ito pa, isang example ko dito is sa Rizal. That, to be honest, looking, when the film Rizal came out, like everybody else, I liked it. Now, the more I look back, the more I hate that film because it contains so many lies about the church and about the Spanish era. Doon sa Rizal, ang opening scene doon, yung mga gumbursa pinapatay. Doon nga, nagwawala pa si Burgos. No? Nagwawala pa si Burgos doon, which did not happen. He was upset. Well, of course, papatayin siya eh. Di ka ba man maging upset kung papatayin ka, di ba? But what happened was, Burgos was going up the scaffold and said, I am innocent. I'm innocent. And one of the priests, I think a Spanish priest, told him, so was Christ. And as they were being garroted, tinugtog ang mga kampana ng Intramuros to protest the killing of the Gumburzas. And that was done at the order of the Archbishop. Hindi lang yon. Definitely walang praile doon sa execution ng mga Gumburza kasi the Archbishop forbade them to be present. So, pero because they felt like it, naglagay sila ng mga praile doon sa execution ng Gumburza, yung scene sa Rizal, na pinapatay yung Gumburza, may praile doon. Tapos pinakita pa doon na gina-justify nila yung mga gina-justify nila yung pagpatay doon sa mga Gumburza. And by the way, in that very poorly researched film, okay, the Dominicans are wearing the wrong habits. Okay, and the priest celebrating Mass is wearing the wrong vestments. So sa totoo lang, Filipino filmmakers, when it comes to researching on Philippine history, bokya talaga. Walang kwenta. Same with the film Baler, by the way. The next slide. Next slide. Oh, by the way, previous slide, please. Gusto ko tong tidbit na to eh. Do you know that until the late 19th century, law was taught in UST in Latin? Not even Spanish. It was taught in Latin. Next slide, please. A typical educated Filipino at the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries would know Latin, Spanish, his native language in the Philippines, probably some Greek. Sabihin na natin tiny elite lang ang may ganon, that told you how, at its best, the education system in the Philippines is actually quite good. Ito pa, yung mga mas concrete na examples. Okay. Order of St. Augustine founded 385 towns. The Recollects founded 235. The Franciscans founded 233. The Jesuits founded 93. And the Dominicans founded 90. Bakit pinakamadami yung OSA? Kasi among all of the religious orders, it was really the Augustinians who had the greatest share in evangelizing the Philippines. Hindi lang yon. Napansin niyo ba, may mga mestiza tayo. Bakit tayo may mestizo? Kasi, unlike other colonial powers that completely frowned on any intermarrying or on any racial intermarriage, sa mga Kastila, okay lang yung intermarriage kasi as long as you're both baptized, that's okay. Of course, there was a social bias. Pag yung lalaki Kastila, yung babae India or mestiza. Pero the point is, it was considered acceptable, yung intermarriage, because the church taught the basic equality of all humans. And there's practically no art, science, or crop that was introduced into the Philippines without the assistance of the friars. Next slide, please. I think I'll deal with that later. Next slide. So I would like to begin my conclusion. So when studying the history of the church, we should first and foremost not just be reactive. We should not just react against criticisms or slanders or lies against the church. We should first and foremost study on our own. And then sa natin titingnan una sa lahat, ano ba yung mga na-achieve ng simbahan? Ano ba yung na-achieve ng mga santo? This is something we keep forgetting. The history of the church is also, to a great extent, in fact, primarily the history of its saints. Now, madalas, even in church history, even in formal church history, there's a tendency to focus on events, on big institutions. But to a great extent, the history of the church is the history of the saints who quietly did the work of God, from generation to generation. From the early church fathers all the way to Saint Padre Pio and Mother Teresa of Calcutta and Saint Jose Maria Escrivá and Pope John Paul II, yung life nila, yung works nila, this is an indispensable part of the history of the church and should be studied. Hindi yung palagi lang tayo na, madami kasalanan ng simbahan, marami nagawang masama ang simbahan. Minsan, may tendency tayo mga Katoliko magkaroon masyadong inferiority complex. Lalong-lalo na dito sa Pilipinas. We should get rid of that. Instead of just apologizing for any problems that may have been committed by many Catholics in the name of the church in the past, we should be proud of the church's achievements as well. Minsan nga, simpleng legend, minsan simpleng research lang the late Miriam Defensor Santiago, God bless her soul, she once said, diba, na si Copernicus ay tinorture ng simbahan kasi nagturo siya ng heliocentric theory. A mere 2-minute Google search would probably have helped her know that that was not true. Unfortunately, many Filipinos, napapansin ko, it's so easy for us to believe the easiest lies about the church. Next slide, please. So here are the principles. By the way, yung presentation ko, you can get that. So, next slide, please. Yun. So here I speak about yung attitude natin mga Pilipino na para bang pag inatake mo simbahan, It means na edukado ka, liberated ka, sophisticated ka, intellectual ka, even if quite frankly, you're just snatching the stories out of thin air. And just as tayo mga Pilipino, mahilig na mahilig tayong magsabi ng masama tungkol sa ating sariling bansa, although that seems to be changing, mga Pilipino, mahilig rin magsalita ng masama tungkol sa sarili ng simbahan, which is the Catholic Church. Next slide. So, ito yung pinaka-final na principles natin. Despite the frailty of the human members of the Church never betrayed the deposit of faith handed on from Christ through the apostles. And this is what is most important. Dito sa simbahan natin, no matter how many bad priests there are, no matter how many bad nuns there are, no matter how many bad bishops or popes or lay people, no matter how many bad Catholics there are, the important thing is this: in the Catholic Church, the doctrine is there and the sacraments are there. So no matter how many bad Catholics there are, that's not an excuse for us to be bad Catholics ourselves, because the Church continues to offer us the means of salvation and the means of perfection. Dapat nating alalahanin na actually tayo ang tunay na biblical church. We are reflected in the Corinthian church that was full of weakness and immorality. And yet, tinuruan pa rin sila ni St. Paul, ni Apostle Paul. Kasi minsan may tendency tayo, nakuha natin yata mula sa mga Amerikano, sa mga evangelicals, na gusto natin yung church natin pure. No? Pure, walang problema, walang masasama. Kaya nga, ang mga protestante sa US at dito, mahilig mag-split up, mahilig mag-form ng ever smaller churches, kasi they want their church to be pure, forgetting that the church is the hospital of sinners. Pag ang simbahan mo, walang sinner, hindi tunay na simbahan yan. The church is really about the story of its sinners who are trying to be saved, who are trying to be holy. Next slide. So ito, be careful in reading history, especially because many secular and especially English language history books are deeply biased against the church. The same is true of the Philippines. No? At the same time, it's good to know church history so one can see that Christ has always been faithful to the church and vice versa. And I will conclude with the saying of the blessed John Henry Cardinal Newman. Hindi ko na-edit. No? To be deep in history is to cease to be Protestant.